Hello and welcome to the Manchester's Red podcast. My name is Steven Railston and we're recording this episode on a Thursday afternoon ahead of Manchester United's opening game of the season against Fulham on Friday night. It is finally here after a few months of a summer break and lots of pre-season friendlies behind us. The opening game is upon us. I am joined by Samuel Luckhurst on this podcast as usual. Samuel, first of all, before we get into the football, I must see how you're doing after the breakup of Tommy Fury and Molly May. Are you all right, and how are you dealing with this heartbreaking news?
I wasn't aware of that news. I couldn't tell you what they look like. I've not heard of what one of those people either. I thought it was going to be maybe a question about my day off attire on Wednesday or something like that. So that was one of the last things I was expecting to hear that query.
I just wanted to catch you off guard. He's a Manchester United fan. I'm believed to be told, Tommy Fury. It was actually on the 6 p.m. news, which was interesting. I don't think that should be shown exactly on TV. Anyways, we're here to discuss the latest transfer news, Samuel, because Matthijs and Noussair and Mazraoui was confirmed on Tuesday night, their arrivals from Bayern Munich. And we've also, of course, obviously got to look ahead to the game this weekend because it's fantastic to have the Premier League back. But to begin with, reaction to those deals. I mean, we discussed them on last week's podcast because we knew they were going to come in, but they've now got across the line. They are United's third and fourth signing of the summer, obviously with Joshua Zirkzee and Lenny Euro as well. So we're thinking probably now there's 15 days left of the transfer window and a midfielder is going to be enough to be signed. But how do you think United have done this summer so far, and what is your reaction to those deals?
I think they've done reasonably okay. If you had to rate it, I guess 6 out of 10, in that they have targeted and reinforced areas of the squad that needed that. The glaring omission is still a midfielder, and 3 of the signings are, of course, were born in the Netherlands, which, as I've said before, there's a caveat with every signing. There's even a caveat with Kylian Mbappe going to Real Madrid, I would argue. But of course, with Manchester United, there tend to be quite a few caveats with players coming in, and they really do need the players who have worked with Ten Hag before, in particular, to do really well, because they're staking a lot in that. It puts a little bit of extra pressure on Ten Hag as well. The fact that Ineos are prepared to, hear him out on his recommendations. I'm sure he will discuss that a little bit more at Carrington later today when we speak to him, and we're not expecting fireworks from that. United have stressed, they've been at pains to say that they're completely aligned. Everyone's on board with these signings, but we'll have to wait and see how they get on. With De Ligt, he was. There's a very good player there. He's still quite young. He's only just turned 25. He's been around for such a long time. And maybe his move to United was a long time coming, given that I remember watching it when some kids were playing against each other before Edwin van der Sar's testimonial in 2011. And the one who stole the show for United that night was Callum Gribbin. He scored a couple of goals in I don't know if it was an 11-a-side game, but it was just a 20-minute match between Ajax's under-13s and United's under-13s. And the lad who lost the ball for United's equalising goal, the second goal, was Matthijs de Ligt, who was 11 at that time. And there is footage of it. I managed to source it just when, I think 5 years ago, de Ligt, of course, was one of the most coveted players in the transfer market, and Callum Gribbin was, I think he was leaving United that summer. So it was an interesting contrast between two players whose paths had crossed many years before that. And you can see De Ligt just in the background in one screenshot as well, even though most of the footage is from a distance taken at the Amsterdam Arena. But this is a player who, as I said, at the age of 11, that's probably when United first crossed paths with him. Derek Langley recommended that United sign him when he was a teenager. United vetoed a move for De Ligt. The 2017 Europa League final victory that Jose Mourinho masterminded was partly because United targeted Matthijs de Ligt by pressing him because his distribution was so good. And of course, in 2019, United would have absolutely love to have had him, but they were never going to get him because they hadn't qualified for the Champions League and their stock was so low. And it turned out the manager, for whatever reason, only wanted to sign British players that summer, which of course didn't last too long. But his pedigree, as it was outlined in the chat he's done with the club, Ajax are the biggest club in the Netherlands. Juventus, I think, I wouldn't say they're the biggest club in Italy. I'd argue that's AC Milan, but domestically they're the most successful. Bayern Munich are absolutely the biggest club in Germany. Manchester United, the biggest club in England. You have to be a good player to play for four clubs of that stature. He's not had the 5 years I think a lot of us would have expected him to have had coming into his mid-20s. It's certainly I've got a frog in my throat for whatever reason, but it's certainly unusual to see a player of his calibre not get a kick for the Netherlands at a major tournament where they reach the semi-finals. And as I said the other day, he didn't have too much playing time at the World Cup under Louis van Gaal. He didn't have a great time when it was Euro 2020. If you leave Juventus after 3 years, after they pretty much saw off Barcelona to sign him, and then you only last 2 years at Bayern Munich, questions are going to be raised about that. And of course, all he's done is reunite with his coach, who really made him the player that he was at Ajax. It is convenient. It is a marriage of convenience for Ten Hag and De Ligt, but is Manchester United's defence better off with Matthijs De Ligt? It absolutely is. It's better off with Noussair Mazraoui as well, and particularly given that he can actually cover both sides. He can play left back and right back. There's probably a better chance of Mazraoui making his full debut against Fulham, maybe, provided there aren't any more defensive injuries, given that Ten Hag does not want to be playing Lisandro Martinez at left back again. Harry Amas is very raw, and now he's got someone in who started at left back in consecutive games at a World Cup for Morocco. And I know you don't want to go off tournament form, but the fact that he's got the experience of playing at that level at left back, you would think that it makes sense to put Mazraoui straight into the team against Fulham with De Ligt. He's got Maguire and Martinez to compete with, and then Lenny Yoro as well, of course. But he's going to be ahead of Lindelof in the pecking order. He's going to be ahead of Johnny Evans in the pecking order. So it'll be fascinating to see how he gets on, because although he did have success in Italy and Germany, I wouldn't say he was a success with Juventus and Bayern Munich, and it's a tall order to be a success in the Premier League, never mind for Manchester United in the Premier League. But it's going to be fascinating. As I've said before, I think every season approaching it with United, we always anticipate it will be a fascinating season. They don't do uneventful seasons, and De Ligt is just going to be a subplot to the drama.
New signings always add me to the excitement going into the new campaign. Absolutely. De Ligt's been signed for 45 million euros, potential of further 5 million add-ons. Mazraoui's been brought in for 15 million euros, again for potential of 5 million add-ons, which seems like very good value in this kind of market these days for two players with experience under their belts. They're only in the mid-20s, but they both have experience with top clubs. I think the signing of De Ligt could either go one or two ways. I think he could look like such a brilliant addition in a few months' time, and people could wonder how United got him so cheaply. Or it could go the other way, and everyone could say, well, that's why he was available for a decent fee after his career plateaued at Juventus and Bayern. Because let's face it, it has. He was established as one of the finest defenders of his age group when he was coming through at Ajax, but things really haven't gone to plan in the last few years. So it's going to be interesting to see if he can hit the ground running. I also think it's interesting that you think Mazraoui is actually the more likely to start. I've been arguing in my pieces today that I think De Ligt will start in central defence with Harry Maguire. That obviously means playing Martinez out of position at left back, which I completely understand the logic in saying, well, why would he do that? I thought he had a bit of a hard time against Oscar Bob, but to be fair, I think Bob would give anyone a hard time at the moment. It's a shame to see from a football and purist perspective that he's got an injury.
He wouldn't at the moment, literally, unfortunately for him. It's not nice at all.
But they had a fantastic pre-season. He looked sharp in the Community Shield. But I think Ten Hag might start Martinez at left back on Friday night, Samuel, with De Ligt and Maguire at centre half. And I also think it's worth bringing up, if De Ligt does start, does that not question why Joshua Zirkzee's impact has been delayed? Because Ten Hag has given his reasoning for that, saying Zirkzee has been eased into action. He will be carefully handled because he returned to training late after Euro 2024. But of course, if De Ligt makes his debut on Friday night, I mean, Xerxes been in reported to Carrington before. He's been in training for longer. He'll have almost 3 weeks of training under his belt by the time of kick-off tomorrow night. So if I was Xerxes, I'd be wondering, why am I not getting a kick yet?
That will be a very good question to ask of Ten Hag if that turns out to be the case tomorrow night after the game. If De Ligt does start and Xerxes doesn't, I don't think any of us are really expecting Xerxes to start. We'd be pleasantly surprised, but when Facundo Pellistri is coming on in the Community Shield ahead of a new signing who was literally the only striker in the squad, it does raise questions. And of course, there was the context for Pellistri coming on was that Harry Maguire was only going to get an hour, and then they needed a stopgap to come in at right back, and Ten Hag thought that Pellistri would fit the bill, given that he didn't bother selecting Harry Amas on the bench. But Xerxes has been in the building at Carrington for quite some time now, and we've already covered the logic United went about in terms of deciding not to have him on the pre-season tour and that he should go to Carrington, even though he was literally training down the road from them pretty much in Los Angeles. I still think that he should have been on the tour because he'd have had a full week of training with them effectively, most of it in LA, because I think they'd have, given that he reported at Carrington on the Monday, he could have had a week's worth of training in LA at UCLA because of the fact he'd have just been down the road. Then, of course, they travelled to South Carolina for the Liverpool game on Friday. He could have watched and learned in San Diego when they played Real Betis, and then he could have come on for a cameo against Liverpool and then made his official debut against City. That seems like that would have seemed like the logical way to go about it for me, but we'll have to wait and see whether United's strategy will pay dividends. But with De Ligt, what I was told was that over his transfer to United, he expects to play, as you can understand. And I think the thing that is maybe overlooked at the moment, but you can see it in a year's time, is that I think it's looking pretty obvious now that Jarrad Branthwaite is going to stay at Everton beyond the closure of the transfer window, because United are not going to be spending £70 million or £80 million on another centre back at this stage. I'd be amazed if they did. But I don't necessarily see another club coming in for Branthwaite at this time. It would be a hell of a coup if they did. It would be a bit of a swoop. But you can see next year when, let's face it, unless he has a storming season, and he had a very good season last season, but next year you would earmark that as the time to cash in on Harry Maguire because of his contract situation. United might even end up releasing him. There's the possibility of that, given that they're not obliged to trigger the 1-year extension in his contract. And given the situation with Victor Lindelof, it is poor. It does give you pause for thought, where maybe you think, do you know what, rather than just trying to extract some money from this player, is it better if we just have a clean break? I don't think that will happen with Maguire. Hopefully it won't anyway, because if it was, it would mean that you'd have had a pretty bad time of it. But they did release Rafael Varane in the summer. Different profile of defender, of course, but he is the same age as Harry Maguire. So that does show you that although there was, again, the mitigation of Varane's wages and the fact that United didn't want him on that salary, and given his injury record as well, infinite sense. But it's not beyond the realms of possibility that Maguire is released, never mind sold next year. But you can certainly see United going back in for Jarrad Branthwaite. You can see them having another go this month. It probably won't get them anywhere unless they're offering £70 million, but they've already got 2 centre-backs in the building. The priority now has to be midfield. But you can certainly see this time next year Jarrad Branthwaite being a Manchester United player. And if you've got a roster of centre-backs, because Johnny Evans I don't think will be at United next season, given his age, he'll be 37 at that point, and Victor Lindelof certainly won't be at United this time next year, whether he's sold this month or not. He's out of contract next year. But you could have 4 centre-backs of De Ligt, Yoro, Martinez and Branthwaite. That's a really, really strong area of the team. It's not perfect. No team's roster of centre-backs is perfect, but it's a good blend there of experience, the youth side of it as well with Branthwaite and Yoro, the Premier League pedigree, of course, Branthwaite will have had would have a couple of Premier League seasons under his belt. Martinez would have 3 Premier League seasons under his belt. De Ligt 1, Euro, not a full one, unfortunately, because of the injury, but he'll have learnt the ropes at some point during his first season with United. But it's not a stretch to imagine United having that quartet of centre backs, and if you're Ineos looking at that and you're involved in it, you think, yeah, that's the kind of area, that's the 2 player per position way we want to go about things, and that's what we aspire to have in other positions as well. So it'll be interesting to see how that pans out. I know that's looking quite far ahead into the future, and I've probably digressed quite drastically, but this is another reason why there is. I think the optimism has started to build a little bit more with United since they came back from the tour. Ironically, I guess, because sometimes you look at pre-season results and that's what underpins the optimism. And you look at their pre-season schedule; they won 2 out of 6 or 7 games, if you were to include the Community Shield as well. But there has been a lot of good. There have been some very promising glimpses of the way they're playing. The Rosenborg game, you can dismiss. I think Ten Hag maybe went a little bit overboard on that, given the timing of it. And I think they need to reconsider doing these Norwegian friendlies going ahead, and certainly doing it as early as they did. It was too early in their schedule. But there was some good stuff against Rangers. There was some good stuff in the first half against Arsenal. Real Betis was a good performance. They played very well in large chunks against Liverpool, even though they lost 3-0. And they created the best chances and should have beaten City last week. They've not lost in their last 2 games against City. The only teams who won beaten in at least 2 games against City last season, I think, were Arsenal, Liverpool, Real Madrid and Chelsea. So United are in pretty good company there. The big test now, of course, is that it's going to be more intense games with the Premier League season started, and that's what they're going to be judged on.
Yeah, it wouldn't be a complete surprise to me if the back line for the first few weeks, obviously with Luke Shaw out injured, would be Martinez, De Ligt, Maguire and Dalot. It all depends on whether Ten Hag wants Martinez in the centre of defence, because he is so crucial to build up play.
He did talk very positively about him playing at left back last week, and I discounted it at the time when he was talking about him and pleasantries. Maybe it can become their new position. And I thought, well, Martinez has done such a good job when he has been fit at centre back, but if you have got more options now, and Maguire clearly isn't a long-term option, but De Ligt is, and Euro certainly is when he's fit, and look, things will change. But Martinez he's not had a full pre-season, but he's been there a week. He's already started the Community Shield. Physically, he's in a better way than he was this time last year as well. But I think he's such an asset at left back, and we go back to it as well. But maybe it was rendered moot last season because Ten Hag really did contradict himself about, I must have 2 right footers and 2 left footers. But now he's got more options, even with some key defenders still injured. Maybe he will revert to that. But then again, you've got Maguire and De Ligt. They are they're 2 right footers. So he has to make a compromise at somewhere along the line, whether it's Martinez at left back or Martinez at centre back.
But yeah, I'd argue Martinez at left back, Maguire and De Ligt is stronger than De Ligt and Martinez, with Mazraoui at left back. Obviously, Dalot's the shoe-in, isn't it, right back? I think that's actually a stronger back 4. And I've discussed this on the podcast.
It's a decent argument, yeah.
Yeah, you look at the trend in the Premier League and the way it's been going. Manchester City, Arsenal, Aston Villa, all the teams who finished in the top 4, Liverpool as well, all played centre-halves at full-back last season. There's definitely advantages in the build-up play and on the counter-press as well to have a central defender at left-back or right-back. So yeah, it wouldn't shock me at all. Moving to the attack then, Samuel, ahead of the Fulham game, we've just talked about Xerxes, who I think we both agree will start on the bench. I would actually have started him. I would have started him in the Community Shield. But it looks like Bruno Fernandes is going to start in the false 9 role again. And I think the interesting debate is who is going to start on the wing. We briefly touched upon it after the Community Shield. I think on form, the right thing to do would be to start Ahmad on the right and Garnacho on the left. But that would still be a huge decision, a Colossus decision, because it would mean on the opening day of the Premier League season, Marcus Rashford is on the bench. I mean, we both agreed in the FA Cup final it was the correct decision to start Rashford.
Yeah.
I kind of feel the scales have tipped into Ahmad's favour across the summer. I think Ten Hag will go with Rashford, but whether I believe that is the right decision, I don't think so. What do you think?
I suspect he'll go Garnacho on the right, Rashford on the left. Mount behind Fernandes.
That's the safe option,
And
isn't it?
I don't see him rocking the boat at this point with Rashford, and he's spoken quite positively about him. But nor should he have any compunction about putting his nose out of joint when. Would you rather have Garnacho on the left or Rashford? I think a lot of people who watch Manchester United regularly would say Garnacho. You'd certainly like to give Ahmad a go on the right hand side. Fulham have got a really underrated left back, I think, in Anthony Robinson. If he is indeed starting this game, I think he's very, very energetic, very proactive. But he's not a left back so good that you have to think, do we need someone who's going to protect our right back or anything like that? It's Man United playing at Old Trafford against Fulham. You've got to be on the front foot. You've got to be taking the game to Fulham as much as possible and trying to dominate that game as often as possible as well. But as I said, I think it'll be that front four I went with. I mean, Mount is another one. I probably wouldn't start Mount in an ideal world. I'd have Fernandes behind Xerxes, but realistically, I don't think that's going to happen. Mount's another one who, like Rashford, he's had a full pre-season and I thought he was good in pre-season. He was dynamic, he was sharp, he was alert. But as soon as the intensity went up in a relatively meaningful game, he underwhelmed. Him and Rashford were possibly the two weakest players for United last week in terms of the starters at Wembley. But they're in good nick and they're fit. Rashford has looked sharp around the penalty area. He's been involved. He has been getting opportunities. I do think, although his misses last week were poor, I think you can kind of dismiss it. I remember 2 years ago, he missed an absolute sitter against Brighton across from Cristiano Ronaldo, and it was one of those when the ball was coming across from him, you thought he's not going to score this, even though a striker, a goal scorer, should be scoring that kind of goal. But he didn't put it away.
I thought Rashford's performance was actually pretty good. I mean, with the exception of those missed chances, which at the end of the day, they will decide games. Goals decide.
It wasn't massively noticeable to me. I know you've said that, but I didn't. I know it's going back to the whole player rating thing, but it was an easy one to do in that he, it's 5 out of 10 because he missed 2 really good chances, and there were clearly more. There were players who outperformed him quite comfortably. Fernandes, Garnacho off the bench. Casemiro was another one.
No, yeah, that's completely fair. But I mean, if he turns one of those in, we're going into the new season, we're thinking, right, Marcus Rashford has got the platform. Yeah. He should start against Fulham. But at the end of the day, you're right, you put those chances past the post and, hit the post with one.
But the point about that miss against Brighton a couple of years ago was that was, he'd only scored 5 goals the previous season, and you thought, well, there he goes again. He's still not up to it. But a couple of weeks later, scores a very important goal against Liverpool, and he's on his way, and he ends up scoring 30 goals that season. So that's why I do think you can discount those chances last week. If he's still doing it in a month's time, he's still not scored, then you probably can't discount those chances. But he has shown in the recent past that he's got form for having a relatively slow start, and then he'll click into gear, and he had his best goal scoring season that season. So sometimes there can be a benefit to him, getting missing these easy early chances and getting them out of his system. And I wouldn't be surprised, 1, if he starts against Fulham, and 2, if he scores against Fulham.
Rashford's at a crossroads in his career, and so is Mason Mount. It was a very disappointing first 12 months at the club after signing from Chelsea. And for all he's looked very good in pre-season, Samuel, I think he looks sharp and he's putting himself about. I know it's a bit of a cliche, but it comes back to this same problem that we've discussed time and time again with Mount, is where is he going to play? Because his best position is clearly as the number 10. He should get the opportunity to play there on Friday night against Fulham, because of course we're expecting Fernandes to play as a false 9. He played there in the Community Shield, although apart from putting himself about, there was a few misplaced passes. He was pretty sloppy, pretty underwhelming, I think, again at Wembley. So it keeps coming back to this point, and it's not going to be fixed because Fernandes is that player. That is his guaranteed position for the majority of the season. So I think to fix Mason Mount and to get the best out of him, you need to play him there. But United are never going to play him there. So I'm starting to look at this player already, who I actually made early comparisons with Donny van der Beek, he had the same problem when he came to the club. He was best in that role. They tried him deeper. Of course, Mount was initially brought to the club to play deeper, and it didn't work out. Van der Beek's now at Girona. I'm not saying Mason Mount's going to go to Girona. I think he's better than that. I still think he will come good. Maybe it's just naivety or stupidity at this point. And I think you laughed at me when I mentioned that at the start of the game at Wembley last weekend. But how do you assess the Mount situation?
There was someone else that you said would come good recently, who our listeners won't have a clue who we're on about, and that's proven not to be the case whatsoever. So you have got form for making. Maybe it's your tipping record. I don't know. I don't know what your bet intakes have been over the summer, but with Mount, there are certain players when they sign for Man United, you just don't. You think, well, I think no, and I'm not far from always right. I thought there was infinite logic in signing Van der Beek, and he was an absolute dud. But with Mason Mount, I just thought I think I almost hoped on behalf of United that this interest would only just be that, because I just think that there's a mismatch there in terms of the dynamic of the club and the demands of the club and the player. There's just something that doesn't compute there, and he's going to be very fortunate. One, having started as the number 10 last week, he will probably start as the number 10 against Fulham. But he's very fortunate that Fernandes is a really selfless footballer who will play brilliantly as the false nine, will play brilliantly on the right, will play brilliantly in deep midfield, where, as I said on Monday, I think that's possibly his best position. But I think United probably should have trialled him there at some point last season, given their issues in midfield. But he is so vital going forward that you can understand why Ten Hag kept him in the front four and in that playmaker role for as often as possible, or as high as often as possible. I mean, the last 3 games against City, he has started as the false nine, and United have had a fair amount of joy with it. He's got 3 assists in all 3, hasn't he? He was the one who laid the ball off to Rashford. He was the one who caressed it into the path of Manu, and he was the one who put Garnacho on his way. That's what I mean about the guy. You put him as the false nine, no problem. He'll assist goals. You put Mason Mount in midfield, where he was due to play, which again was a big reservation that I had, and he can't do it. And immediately, we all saw that Wolves game last season. It was just not going to work, and I had to abandon it quite quickly. And it was a forced abandonment because Mount got injured after 2 games. And then he just barely played after that throughout the season. And last week was only his 9th start. He's clearly a good footballer. You're not a bad footballer. To come through that Chelsea academy, to play in all those finals for Chelsea, to play in a European Championship final for England, and to endear yourself to coaches like Lampard, Tuchel, Southgate, Ten Hag. That's a very diverse set of coaches there. And I imagine Mauricio Pochettino would have much rather have had him than seen Mount go. But there was only one winner in that deal last year. And that was Chelsea, of course, getting at least £55 million, rising 60 million for him. And he has really got his work cut out to be a success at United. There are a few players in the United team who are clearly not going to go anywhere over the next couple of weeks, in terms of the window's closing date. And it's, as far as I'm concerned, it's all on them. It's not on Ten Hag. It's not on the coaching staff. It's not on the tea ladies or the laundry ladies or what have you. It's on them to make sure that the club aren't saddled with them. They're lucky to have them. Mount is one of those players, Anthony and Marcus Rashford are 2 others. Because yesteryear, Rashford would not have been at Man United after some of his indiscretions last season. Anthony would never, ever have got a 3rd season. But things have changed, and certainly under PSR as well, that has safeguarded some futures there. Mount is, last season, absolute disaster, but this is a trial now for him over the next 9 months. He's got to show that he's up to it at Man United, and I've always had my doubts about him, but also equally after he came on and scored against Brentford, I thought he should have started against Chelsea 4 days later. So, as I've said before, in terms of our coverage of whether it's the club or the team or the manager or individual players, I don't think anybody criticises them as much as we do. but I don't think anybody praises them as much as we do, because we do give them their flowers when they deserve it. And Mount did deserve it after his well-taken goal against Brentford, but that was an anomaly last season from him.
He took that goal brilliantly. We were both at the GTEC Stadium, and I mean, I think our jaws dropped and put that in the back of the net, because United had been hammered all game by Brentford. They didn't deserve the win, but it looked like they'd snatched the victory right on the death of Mount's goal. Obviously, Brentford then went up the other side of the pitch and scored a few minutes later. But yeah, we both agreed Mount should have started at Stamford Bridge. He was only given a late cameo. I think he came on with 10 minutes to play, and
came on with them winning in like the 93rd minute. They ended up. I think that there was a lot of despair in the press box that night, just the rewrite and the misery that United had inflicted on us, and I think there was a lot of despair in the away end, and among other the Manchester United fans who couldn't be at Stamford Bridge that night. That was, I mean, it was an exhausting season, but that was a particularly extraordinary game.
I liked it. He seemed to be up for the challenge when he came on. I mean, he got booed off every corner at Stamford Bridge, and he seems to have a bit of bite about him when he does.
Yeah, he has.
So
yeah,
it's definitely miss him, man.
Definitely.
It'd be a miss not to mention that Bruno Fernandes has signed a new contract as well. I know we discussed that on the last podcast. A free end deal that will safeguard his future at United until 2027. And as we said in the previous podcast, fully deserved, the driving force of the team, and he deserved a new deal to reflect that status. We'll leave it there for part one anyways, and we'll be back in a moment for part two. Welcome back to part two of the Manchester is Red podcast, and we're going to look at the Fulham game in a bit more detail. And Samuel, you're going to give us your prediction, or what you'd like to see actually, what you'd like to see from the game, because for me, I think it's so important that United concede fewer shots this season. How many times did we watch them last year? And I think they averaged around 20 shots conceded per game at one point. Erik ten Hag kept on denying it was a problem in press conferences, and his argument was, well, they were low quality chances. But as I said when I did the pre-Community Shield podcast with Sai, naturally the more shots that you concede, the higher the chance of the opponent has of scoring. So I really want to see that midfield tightened up on Friday night, and I want to see fewer shots conceded. What else are you looking for in that performance that you think, yep, that's good, they've worked on that this summer and it's a positive going forward?
Well, they need to win first and foremost, just to get that off to that good start, but win in a convincing way. That was a big issue last season. You could probably have counted on two hands the amount of times they won games by a minimum of 2 clear goals. They've never scored 5 goals in a game under Ten Hag, and certainly the first win last season, it did set the tone. Even though they won the game, it did kind of set the tone for that season, because the midfield was all over the place. Wolves, whose manager had only been parachuted in some like 9 days earlier, whatever it was, were the better team and somehow didn't get a penalty right at the death when Andre Onana clattered into the guy whose name I can't recall. It's a copy and paste job, that. And United didn't really ever get going. I went through all the games last season, and you look at all of them apart from the cup final, and there was some kind of caveat or some kind of issue, whether they won, lost or drew. Even West Ham at home, which on the face of it, 3-0 win, and they were very clinical that day. They were uncharacteristically clinical. But as David Moyes said afterwards, West Ham had played quite well, and he thought, and I agreed with him, that he thought West Ham were better with their performance than they were when they beat United 2-0 just before Christmas. And that was the mad thing about United last season. They had some wins, they had some games where you'd think this is really positive, but there's also this issue as well. And sometimes you just got to reflect the sheer positivity of it, like Wolves away with a 97th minute winner. But that's what I liked about Ten Hag after that game last season, because there were times last season where he did come out with some absolute drivel about United playing really well and how we're in the right direction, even though they were dropping like a stone to 8th in the table. But after that Wolves game, it clearly irked him that they'd won that game with a 97th minute winner, having been 2-0 up and 3-1 up, and how they had played in the first half. They should have won that game 3-0 or 4-0. And that was always that elusive, convincing win was always beyond them until the FA Cup final. They picked the perfect moment to show, to produce a convincing win. That, of course, did have a bit of drama at the end with Jeremy Doku scoring, but the overall performance is one of the best from United in years. When you get a day where I'm pretty damn sure every outfield player I gave an 8 out of 10 or above in the player ratings. The only one who didn't get an 8 was Nana, because he dropped a dolly from Doku, and he'd made an exceptional save earlier in the second half. I can't remember, was it from Haaland? But it was a very good save. And you don't really get many games like that where all 10 outfield players play as well as they did, but they were exceptional that day. But there were very few other occasions last season where they were truly exceptional. And as I said, like even Everton away, 3-0, very good win, clinical again. But United were 1-0 up at half-time in that game without creating a chance. Diogo Dalot sent a cross in that was going towards the dugout until Alejandro Garnacho got his bicycle out and scored the goal of the season. And United were 1-0 up at half-time. And in the second half, they got a penalty, well taken. And then, of course, because they had Anthony Marshall on the pitch against Everton, it was the one time that you could bet on him being useful, and he got his customary goal against Everton. But even in a game where they're winning 3-0 in a very testing atmosphere, given Everton's protests against the Premier League over the points deduction, and United have had some very iffy days at Goodison Park as well, of course. But you came away from it thinking, how the hell have they won that 3-0? Some of the games, it was a real weird balancing act, and that was during a period where they were playing well in a lot of games. But Copenhagen and Galatasaray, I think, were either side of the Goodison game, and they threw it away in both of those games. Those two games really cost them effectively in terms of Champions League qualification. It was the 2 defeats to Galatasaray and Copenhagen, and the draw with Galatasaray as well. So going back to Fulham, who of course won at Old Trafford last season with that added time goal, and completely deserved it as well. I think United were only good after they got that late goal, which looked like it would certainly secure a point, and then it looked like they might actually get a winner, and only they got sucker punched by Alex Iwobi in the 95th minute, I think it might have been. It was well into added time, but Fulham absolutely merited their win at Old Trafford last season. And it's with the Premier League now. I know I sound like a manager here, but it doesn't feel like there are many gimmies anymore. There might be from one of the promoted teams. Sheffield United were good for a gimme last season, but United being United, they needed a 70-something minute winner to win 2-1 at Bramall Lane. And at Old Trafford, they actually went behind twice to Sheffield United before eventually winning 4-2 that night. But that was United last season. There was something eventful happening every week, even in games where you look at the score and you think, oh, they've won well, that must have been comfortable. That was very rarely the case last season. So they need, obviously they've drawn a line under last season, and it is a new season. They've got some new players in, and they've been working on their patterns of play, etc., etc. But I really do think they need a convincing win, even if it's just being clinical, limiting Fulham to pot shots and them not having many shots at goal. I'm not saying United need to be vintage United. They had an opening day win against Fulham in 2006, which absolutely set the world alight. They went 4-0 up inside 20 minutes and won 5-1. And that was a United team that nobody thought could challenge for the title that season, after Chelsea had won it 2 seasons on the spin, and United's only outfield signing that summer was Michael Carrick. Ruud van Nistelrooy had left. But they blitzed Fulham, and they were top of the league that season for all but 2 weeks. So, and if they have a rip-roaring start against Fulham, maybe history could repeat itself, and we'd be delighted to cover that. But it is still going to be a tall order.
Yeah, I mean, United have the best opening day record in Premier League history. I think it's 25 wins since the inaugural year in 92 and 93. So they have form for starting very well. Whether or not they'll come flying out the traps against Fulham on Friday night, I'm not so sure. I think Fulham will be bang up for it as usual. I mean, it's a nighttime game, isn't it, at Old Trafford? It is an occasion, and they'll have that February game in the back of their minds. I mean, they were much the better side that day. As you said, Harry Maguire thought he did enough to ensure the point was shared, but Iwobi went up the other end and found the back of the net, which was very disappointing. What's your aim for the season? Well, not what's your aim. What's your prediction, Samuel? How many pieces would you like to file?
No. To survive it.
What's your prediction? Where do you think United have to be? What do they have to do? Because, I mean, top 4, that has to be the aim, doesn't it? And the trophy would be ideal. To win 3 trophies in 3 consecutive seasons would be a real feather in Ten Hag's hat. But it is going to be tough again. Manchester City and Liverpool, Arsenal will be bang there. Liverpool, there is some uncertainty after Jurgen Klopp's departure. They've not really made any signings, have there as well? Zubimendi, that deal has fell through, but I think they've still got a very strong team. Tottenham have improved. Dominic Solanke's come in. Newcastle don't have European football, so they'll have that benefit. And Aston Villa, I mean, you could go on. I've not mentioned Chelsea, who are a basket case club, but that top 4 is no longer a top 4. It is now around a top 7 or a top 8, and it is very tough to get into the Champions League.
West Ham have made some good signings as well.
I've not even mentioned West Ham. That's what I mean. So it's so competitive now, the top half of the Premier League, isn't it?
It is. I've done a quite very positive piece on United, just because I do think there is cause for optimism. I mean, the intro does outline a lot of issues going on there, whether it's not signing a midfielder, defenders dropping like flies, conceding quickly after scoring and conceding in the final 10 minutes, which they did countless times last season. They did again last week against City. But you look at some of the players in that squad, and if you're a United fan, you're thinking, I'm glad they're on my team. I think they've, as I said on Monday, they've got 4 players who I would say, at least 4 players who would be good enough in a title-winning team, which is what they need to get to eventually. This season is one to, it's a building block season unless they do something relatively remarkable, and that's why I'd never say United can't win the title, because Leicester won it in 2016, Derby won it twice in the 70s, Nottingham Forest were champions of England 6 years after they were relegated in the 70s as well. I'd never go to that extent, but realistically they won't win the title this season. The minimum aim has to be top 4. I think Arsenal, whoever finishes above Arsenal, this is Arsenal who, it was so difficult to take them seriously 2 or 3 years ago, but whoever finishes above Arsenal, if anyone does, I think wins the title. I think they are possibly the best equipped team going into the season, bar the fact they don't have the know-how to win the title. The manager does, of course, because he was on City's coaching staff for 2 or 3 of those title wins with Pep Guardiola, but it's a different kettle of fish when you're the manager of a club. I think that's the only thing Arsenal lack, but their seasonal performances, they are possibly building up to what would be their first title in 21 years, extraordinarily. City's squad looks pretty thin, but of course it's extremely talented, and I think they have to be the favourites. As you said about Liverpool, they're still going to be mourning Jurgen Klopp. They've not made a single signing. They've got some pivotal players who are out of contract next year as well. So you wonder whether that's going to have whether that's going to create any additional uncertainty. And beyond that, I don't think any of the teams should instill dread in United. And of course, 4 of them finished above United last season. As you said, in the case of Spurs, Dominic Solanke, that could go one of either 2 ways. It's a big fee for a player who was very, very good at Bournemouth, but whether he's going to be able to make that leap at a club who aspire to finish in the top 4 remains to be seen. Aston Villa would do extremely well to finish in the top 4 again, having been dark horses for that last season. Newcastle, I think it's Alan Shearer who's predicted that they'll finish 4th, but he's more Geordie than you, Stephen. So I think he had his black and white hat on when he was in his punditry role there. But Newcastle are a force to be reckoned with, and these teams, Villa, Tottenham, Newcastle, they are in United's slipstream. So United can't. They're not going to be complacent in regards to these teams. But as Ten Hag has stressed, and it is one of his more, it's one of his most most repeated phrases, but they can beat any team in the world, as they showed last season with the majority of them. And he obviously is referring to that City FA Cup final win, and he will continue to refer to it for as long as he's at United. But I don't see those teams as instilling dread in United at this stage. And United, if they have a worse season than last season, then a lot of heads have got to roll. But they cannot go without
It's not possible
qualifying for the Champions League.
No,
well, I would refuse to say that, just because I think Manchester United, unfortunately for them, in the past 11 years, they have become the club where anything that can go wrong will go wrong. And we've seen it, whether it's the stadium roof, although I think Borussia Dortmund did them a favour during the Euros with their own waterfall. Whether it's the manner of certain defeats, just the spectacular nature of their spirals. And of course, there is a morbid curiosity with Manchester United struggling, not just across the country, but worldwide as well. But I would be cautiously optimistic that they won't finish lower than 8th this season. But they have to get in the top 4. The prospect of them going 2 years without being in the Champions League, you can't tolerate that. I mean, I argued a number of times that they couldn't tolerate finishing 8th last season. And of course, the FA Cup victory had a massive bearing on their decision with the manager. And if they didn't win it, they would change the manager. It's very obvious. But they've got the qualities to have a much better season and a successful season as well. Last season, you couldn't say it was a successful season because of the league finish and how they got on in the Champions League. But I think that looking at that squad compared to the other squads, they should at the very least be competing to finish in the top 4. They can qualify for the Champions League through the Europa League as well, of course. If they're qualifying for the Champions League by winning the Europa League, it's a successful season. A truly successful season would be finishing top 4 and a trophy. And Ten Hag's got form for it.
Ten Hag's first season, yeah.
Yeah.
Could I get you? I know you hate this. You absolutely hate this. I know you well.
Where do I think United will finish?
Yeah, I'm going to say, can I nail down your top 6 prediction, right? So I'll give you mine. I think Arsenal will do it in first. I think Manchester City in second. I think Liverpool in third. And then I think it's between Tottenham and United in 4th or 5th. I might get a few pelters for this, but I think Tottenham might edge it in 4th. As you said, the signing of Dominic Solanke could go either way, but I think he's took it to another level, and I think he'll permanently stay there. I think he's a very, very good player. So I think Tottenham will edge it in 4th. I think United in 5th, and I think Newcastle in 6th. So are you going to see United in 4th or 3rd?
No, I'm not just saying it to be contrary as well. I was discussing earlier with a colleague that I do think United will get in the top 4 this season, but we're making these predictions before the end of the transfer window. And I think everyone is doing it this time because the season's about to start. But I always say I prefer to make a prediction after the transfer window is closed. But we are duty bound, of course, to make them now. I would also have Arsenal as first, unless City do some serious business over the coming weeks. But then again, I wouldn't be surprised if City win it, of course. I'd have City second, probably Liverpool third, and then United 4th. Spurs 5th, Newcastle 6th.
So we're close to singing off the same hymn sheet there, aren't we? I think roughly around the same. It's going to be fascinating, really. It always is on the verge of a new season.
Yeah.
Because you predict how a team might do, for example, Tottenham, but you could also equally see it fall apart and Postecoglou being sacked by November. I mean, stranger things have happened. But all stylistically, they're impressive. They had a weird fall off, didn't they, in the second half of last year?
Yeah, they did.
Exactly. So, anyways, we're looking forward to the game on Friday night. It should be a great contest. I mean, under the lights, it's always something to look forward to, isn't it? Old Trafford, and it should be a fantastic atmosphere. And most of all, Samuel, you get to sit next to me again 1 week after the community.
I know.
So happy days.
I know. It's becoming a regular occurrence after our road trips towards the end of last season. So I'm not complaining for 1 minute. But it's Ty who's drawn. Ty who he's drawn the short straw after getting out of all those trips last season. It's him at Brighton at 12:30 next Saturday with me.
I'll be at a wedding that day. So do you know what? I wasn't too bothered when I saw it was Brighton. That clashed with the wedding. I mean, we were only there in May, weren't we? So it wasn't too long ago. But on the bright side, it should be good weather.
Indeed. What I would say though is that United, which was very, very considerate of them with the it was mentioned on the fans forum that they'd gone to the Premier League complaining about inconvenient, inconsiderate kick-off times for their away fans. And what have the Premier League done? First 2 away games this season: Brighton away, Southampton away, 12:30 on the Saturday. Nothing will change with the Premier League. They couldn't give a toss about match-going supporters. But United, their away ends, they'll always be sold out, and they'll always be the loudest away fans around, I'd imagine.
I mean, United got shafted with the scheduling in March, April, and as you say, the fans were still there.
We did as well.
We did as well, but the fans, you know what I mean? We actually have to go down, don't we, when travel is free. They spend their hard-earned cash each week travelling around the country.
Yeah, it's
fantastic,
dreadful.
especially during a tough period. We'll leave it there. Thanks, Samuel, for your time.
Thank you, Stephen, and see you tomorrow.
You certainly will. Enjoy the weekend. Enjoy the match on Friday night, and we'll be back on Monday to reflect on the Fulham game. Take care.